I came off the road on a Thursday in November after 9 days out, and there was a stranger's truck in my driveway and a surveyor's stake driven into my mother's flower bed. I stood there in my work boots with the diesel still in my clothes, and I could not make sense of a single thing I was looking at. The man in the driveway asked me who I was. I told him I was the owner. He said, "No, sir, you are not," and he handed me a piece of paper with my own signature on it. My name, my handwriting. A date. I was 1,100 miles away. My name is Wendell Gaines. I was 57 years old that November, and I had been driving freight for 28 years out of a yard in Wilmington, Ohio. 9 days out, 3 days home, then 9 days out again. That was the shape of my life, and I had made my peace with it a long time before. The house sits on 3.8 acres off a county road, back behind a windbreak of black walnut trees my father planted the same year he framed the place. 1968. He built it with his own 2 hands and a borrowed cement mixer. And he died in the upstairs bedroom in 2004, and my mother has slept in the downstairs bedroom every night since. I pulled the rig onto the shoulder because there was no room in the drive. There never is. It is a working farmhouse driveway gravel wide enough for 2 vehicles if one of them backs up. That afternoon, there were 3. A white pickup with a magnetic sign on the door, a silver sedan I did not recognize, and a compact car parked crooked in the grass, which was my wife's, though she had never once in 22 years parked in the grass. I sat in the cab for a second with my hand still on the key. The engine ticked as it cooled. Out past the windshield, I could see 2 men in the side yard, one of them holding something up at eye level and squinting through it, and the other one writing on a clipboard. There was an orange plastic ribbon tied to a wooden stake, and the stake was driven right down through the middle of my mother's iris bed. She planted those irises the spring after my father died. Purple ones. She dug the bed herself with a hand trowel because she said the tiller would tear the roots. She was 73 years old that year, and she knelt in the dirt for 2 days and would not let me help. I got out of the truck. My knees were stiff the way they get after a long haul, and I remember being annoyed about that of all things. I remember thinking I needed to stretch before I did anything else. Then I looked at that stake again, and I did not stretch. I walked. The man with the clipboard saw me coming. He was maybe 40, wearing a fleece vest over a button-down shirt. The kind of man who works outside but does not really work outside. He lowered the clipboard and gave me the smile people give when they are about to explain something to you. "Afternoon," he said. "Can I help you?" "That is my mother's flower bed." He looked down at the stake like he was noticing it for the first time. "We can move it a few feet. That is not a problem. You can pull it out is what you can do." The other man had stopped squinting through his instrument. He was standing very still, watching the 2 of us, and I could tell from the way he was standing that he had done this before, and it had not gone well. "Sir," the clipboard man said, and his voice changed a little, got flatter and more careful. "Are you a neighbor?" "I live here." He blinked. He looked past me at the house, then back at me. "You live here 28 years. Longer. My father built it." The clipboard came up an inch. He was buying himself time, and I could see him doing it. "Can I ask your name?" "Wendell Gaines." Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly. More like a man who has just found the loose wire he has been looking for and does not want to touch it yet. "Mr. Gaines," he said. "Okay, all right." He turned part way toward the other man and then turned back. "Mr. Gaines, we are contracted to do a boundary survey on this parcel. We were told the property was vacant during the daytime hours." "Who told you that?" "The owner." I stood there in my own side yard with diesel on my sleeves, and I laughed. It was not a real laugh. It came out of my chest sideways. "Son," I said, "I am the owner." He did not answer right away. He tucked the clipboard under his arm and reached into the inside pocket of his vest, and he took out a folded packet of papers, and he unfolded it slow, the way you handle something you would rather not be holding. "Sir," he said, "I think there has been some kind of mistake, and I want you to understand that this is not my part of it. I am just the survey crew." He held the papers out. I did not take them right away. I remember the wind coming across the field behind the house, cold, carrying the smell of cut corn stubble. I remember hearing the screen door on the back porch bang once against the frame, the way it does when nobody catches it. Then I took the papers. It was a deed. A general warranty deed recorded with the Clinton County Recorder, transferring the property at 4419 Sabina Road from Wendell R. Gaines, a married man, to Corinne A. Gaines, sole and separate property. There was a signature at the bottom. It was mine. Every loop of it. The way I closed the W. The way I never quite finished the S. 28 years of signing bills of lading, and I know my own hand the way I know my own face in a mirror. Below it, in a notary block, stamped in blue ink, was a date. September 17th. I read it 3 times standing in that yard, and each time the ground got a little less solid under my boots. Because on September 17th, I had been sitting in a truck stop outside Amarillo, Texas, eating a cheeseburger and waiting on a reload, 1,100 miles from any notary in the state of Ohio. The survey crew left within 10 minutes. The clipboard man pulled the stake out of the iris bed himself, and he did it carefully with 2 hands, and he set it in the bed of his pickup instead of tossing it. I have thought about that since. He did not have to do that. Before he got in the truck, he stopped with the door open and said, "Mr. Gaines, whoever recorded that deed did it through the county. It is on the public record. You can go look at it yourself Monday morning. And if I were you, I would." Then they were gone, and it was just me and the gravel and the sound of the wind in the walnut trees. I stood in the yard a while longer holding those papers. Somewhere in the back of my head, a voice that sounded a lot like my father was telling me to go inside and get an explanation before I got angry, because an angry man cannot hear anything. My father was a patient man, in a way I have never managed to be. The compact car was still parked crooked in the grass. I went in through the back porch. The screen door banged behind me, and I did not catch it. The kitchen smelled like coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. There was a mug on the counter with lipstick on the rim and a plate in the sink. The little television on top of the refrigerator was on, with the sound turned all the way down, some daytime show people laughing silently at a table. Corinne was standing at the counter with her back to me. She is 51. She does the books 2 days a week for a dental practice over in Blanchester, and she has done it for 9 years. She had her hair up in a clip, and she was wearing a sweater I did not recognize, gray with a fold-over collar. And I remember noticing that and filing it away without knowing why I was filing it. She heard the door and turned around, and for about half a second, before she got her face arranged, I saw something in it I had never seen there before. She was afraid of me, not startled, afraid. And then it was gone, and she was smiling, and she said, "You were early." Traffic was light through Columbus. Well, she wiped her hands on a dish towel that did not need it. I would have gotten something out of the freezer. I set the papers down on the kitchen table. Face up. She looked at them. Then she looked at me. Then she looked back at them, and she folded the dish towel in half and set it on the counter and took her time about it. "There were men in the yard," I said. "I know." There was a stake in Mama's flowers. Wendell. "Corinne, there is a deed on that table with my name signed to it, and I did not sign it." She let out a long breath through her nose. And then she did something that has stayed with me longer than almost anything else about that day. She pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. And she folded her hands, and she looked up at me with an expression of enormous patience, like I was a customer with a billing question. "You did sign it," she said. "I did not. You signed it in March, with the refinance paperwork." She reached over and turned the deed toward herself and tapped it twice with one finger. "Do you remember how thick that stack was? Do you remember you signed 40 pages at the kitchen table in about 11 minutes because you had to be in Toledo by 6? I did remember the refinance. I remembered the stack. I remembered signing until my hand cramped and asking her twice what page we were on, and her saying, "Just keep going, honey." "That was March," I said. "This is dated September. That is when it was recorded." Recording and signing are not the same thing. Ask anybody. She said it easily, without a pause anywhere in it. The refinance fell through, and Dale said as long as we were reorganizing anyway, it made more sense to have the deed in one name for the estate side of things. Because of your mother. Because of Medicaid. There it was. Medicaid. She laid it down like a good card. "Because of my mother," I said. "Because if she ever needs skilled care in Wendell she is going, to the state looks back 5 years at every asset in the household. 5 years. If the house is in your name and she is living in it, they can come after it. If it is in mine and I am not her child, it is cleaner." She spread her hands. "I have been trying to talk to you about this since spring. You are gone 9 days out of every 12. And here is the thing. Here is the part I am not proud of." It made sense. Standing there in my own kitchen, with my boots still on, tired down to the bone, 22 years of marriage behind me, listening to my wife explain estate planning in a calm voice, I felt the ground come back up under me a few inches. Because there is a version of the world where every word of that is true, and I had been living inside that version for a long time, and it is very hard to walk out of a house you have lived in that long. "Who is Dale?" I said. She did not blink. "Dale Prescott, Marguerite's husband. He runs the branch over on Rombach." A small shrug. "He does this for a living, Wendell. He offered. He did it as a favor." I looked at the sweater again. Gray with a fold-over collar. "Nobody told me," I said. "I have told you 4 times." Her voice went thin at the edge for the first time. "You do not listen. You come home, you sleep 16 hours. You fix whatever is broken in the barn, and you leave. That is not me being cruel. That is just the calendar." That landed because it was not entirely a lie. That is what the good ones do. They put the true thing right next to the false thing and let you sort it out yourself. I picked the deed back up off the table. "Then it would not bother you," I said, "if I go down to the recorder's office Monday and read the whole file." And that half-second happened again. That flicker. Before she could answer, my mother called out from the downstairs bedroom, down the hall past the pantry, in a voice thinner than I remembered from 9 days before. "Wendell, is that you, honey? Come here. Come in here right now." I found my mother sitting up in bed, with a paperback open face down on the quilt, and the reading lamp on, even though there was still daylight in the window. She looked smaller than she had 9 days before. That happens sometimes in a stretch that short, when the heart is not doing its job the way it should. "There you are," she said. "Shut the door." I shut the door. She patted the edge of the bed, and I sat down on it the way I had sat on the edge of that same bed 100 times since I was a boy. Except the bed used to be somewhere else in the house, and I used to be a great deal shorter. "There were men out in the yard," she said, "with a machine on a tripod. I saw them. They put a stick in my flowers." "I saw that too, Mama." She looked at me a long moment. My mother has pale blue eyes that have not changed since I was small, and when she looks at you like that, it is very hard to tell her anything but the truth. So I did not try. "There is a deed," I said. "Says the house was signed over to Corinne. Says I signed it in September." "Were you here in September?" "I was in Texas." She nodded slowly, like a woman confirming something she already suspected, rather than learning something new. And that nod bothered me more than anything the survey crew had said. "Mama, do you know something about this?" She was quiet a moment, and her hand found the edge of the quilt and worked at a loose thread there back and forth, the way she does when she is deciding how much of a thing to say out loud. "I know your wife has had that Prescott man in this house more than she has had you," she said finally. "That is what I know for certain. The rest, I only suspect. And I have never been the kind of woman who says a suspicion out loud and lets it do the damage of a fact." Dale Prescott, the banker, Marguerite's husband. She looked at me carefully. "You did not know that?" "I know it now. He comes on a Tuesday mostly, sometimes a Thursday. He parks down by the Hendricks mailbox and walks up through the side field like a man out for his health." Her mouth made a thin line. "I am 82 years old, Wendell. I sit in this room and I sew, and I watch the same field every day of my life. You would be surprised what a person notices when nobody thinks she is paying attention." I sat there with my hands on my knees, and I did not say anything for a while, because there was nothing in me that wanted to say anything. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally managed. "Because you were 9 days gone and 3 days home, and on your 3 days home, you were so tired you fell asleep in that recliner with your boots still laced, and I did not have the heart to hand you something like this on top of everything else you were carrying." Her hand stopped working the thread. "And because I did not have proof of anything, only a feeling and a schedule I did not like." Emmett tried to tell me. It was not a question. It came out of me the way a thing does when you have been not thinking about it for 14 months, and it finally surfaces on its own. My mother's face changed. Something old and sad moved across it. "Emmett Boyle has been a good neighbor to this family for 30 years, she said quietly. "He drove me to my cardiology appointment in April, when your truck was in Georgia, and Corinne said she had a headache. He shovels that end of our drive every winter without being asked, and without ever once mentioning it." "Mama, you called him a liar on his own porch," she said, and her voice did not rise. It just went very still and very clear. "And you told him to mind his own business, and you did not speak to him again for 14 months. I know because he told me. Not to complain. He told me because he was worried about you, and he did not know what else to do with the worry." I put my face in my hands for a moment. Just for a moment. I have not done that in front of my mother since I was maybe 12 years old. "I have the papers from the funeral," she said. "Your father's papers. The deed, the survey, the whole file from when he built this place. I kept a copy in my hope chest because your father did not trust banks with things that mattered. And neither do I." I looked up. "You have the original deed. I have a copy your father made. Notarized, filed properly, everything in order. 1968. She reached over and patted my hand once, the way she used to when I was small and had scraped a knee. "Whatever is sitting in that county recorder's office with your name signed on a day you were not here, Wendell, it is not the only piece of paper in the world." I sat with her a while longer as the light went out of the window, and neither one of us said much else. And somewhere down the hall, I could hear Corinne moving around the kitchen, running water, opening and closing the refrigerator. The ordinary sounds of a house that did not feel like mine anymore. That night I lay awake in the bed I had slept in for 22 years, staring at a ceiling I had helped my father finish the summer before I left for the service. And I made myself do something I had been avoiding since the day before, sitting in that truck stop outside Amarillo with the radio on and no idea at all what was waiting for me back home. I made myself go back through the last 14 months, one delivery at a time, and look for every place I had chosen not to see. I want to tell you what it is like to drive freight for a living, because I do not think most people understand it, and it matters to what happened after. You are gone. That is the whole job in 3 words. You are gone Monday morning before the sun is up, and you are gone through Tuesday and Wednesday, and most weeks you are still gone on Thursday, somewhere in Pennsylvania or New Jersey, or once as far out as El Paso, sleeping in a bunk built into the back of a cab with the engine idling to keep the heater running. And you tell yourself the whole time that this is what providing looks like. I started driving the year I turned 29. Before that, I ran a small engine repair shop out of a pole barn behind my father's place, and it never quite made enough, and Corinne and I had just gotten married, and a man I knew from church said his outfit was hiring, and the pay was steady. And I took it, because steady sounded like the answer to everything. 28 years. I want you to sit with that number the way I have had to sit with it. 300 days a year, more or less, on the road. That leaves 65 days at home, and take away sleep, and take away the farm work that piles up while you are gone, and what you have left for your wife, for your marriage, is not very much. I knew that. I told myself it did not matter because the intention was good. I was providing. I was doing the thing a man is supposed to do. I met Corinne at a county fair the summer I was 26. She was working the dunk tank for the Methodist youth group, laughing at every single person who missed, and I bought 6 balls just to keep talking to her, and I hit the target on the 4th one and felt genuinely sorry about it. She came up sputtering and furious and beautiful, and I asked her to get a lemonade with me before she had even wrung out her hair. We got married 2 years later in the same church. Her father walked her down the aisle in a suit he had bought for the occasion because he did not own one. My father stood up as my best man because I did not have any close friends who were not also driving trucks somewhere across the country. For the first few years it was fine. Hard, but fine. I would come home and she would have supper waiting, and we would sit up late talking about things I do not even remember now. Small things. The kind of small things that add up to a life. Delia was born the 3rd year. I missed it by 11 hours. Sitting in a truck stop in Terre Haute, and I have never forgiven myself for that. And I do not expect I ever will. Somewhere in there it changed. I could not tell you the exact year. There is no single day where a marriage stops being a marriage and starts being an arrangement. It happens the way rust happens, one small spot at a time, in a place you are not looking because you are 300 miles away and the truck needs your whole attention. She used to call me every night around 8. Then it was every other night. Then it was when I called her. I told myself that was just a phase, that women get busy, that a marriage settles the way a house settles, with some creaks that do not mean anything is actually wrong. My mother had a stroke 6 years ago, a mild one, and moved into the downstairs bedroom after. And Corinne took that on without complaint, and I was grateful for it, in a way that let me stop asking harder questions about anything else. A woman who cares for your ailing mother, I told myself, is not a woman you need to worry about. I see now that gratitude can be its own kind of blindness. You hand somebody your trust because they have earned it in one room of the house, and you stop checking whether they have kept it in the others. Dale Prescott's name had crossed my path before that Thursday, though I did not think anything of it at the time. He and Marguerite came to a cookout we had 2 summers back. He talked about fishing on Cowan Lake for 20 minutes straight, and I remember thinking he was a decent enough fellow, a little too smooth for my taste, the kind of man who shakes your hand a beat too long. I do not remember Corinne saying much to him that day. I remember the opposite, actually. I remember her being quiet around him, almost formal. And I filed that away at the time as nothing, because why would a woman act strange around a man she was not thinking about? I understand now that quiet can go 2 directions. Sometimes it means nothing is there. Sometimes it means somebody is working very hard to make sure nothing shows. I lay in that bed most of the night, doing the arithmetic of my own marriage, counting up all the small moments I had let pass because I was too tired, or too far away, or too committed to a version of my life where the story stayed simple. A man provides. A woman keeps the house and the mother-in-law and the accounts. Everybody plays their part, and nobody asks hard questions, because hard questions take energy I did not have left after driving 600 miles. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely and lay staring at the ceiling my father and I had finished together the summer before I shipped out. And I thought about Emmett Boyle standing on my porch with his hat in his 2 hands, working up the courage to tell a man something that man did not want to hear. I thought about the word he had used before I cut him off and told him to get off my property. He had not said the word affair. I remembered that clearly now, lying in the dark. He had been trying to work his way toward it slowly, the way a careful man does, and I had not given him the chance to get there. 14 months. I had spent 14 months being proud of the fact that I had not let anybody, not even an old man who had never once lied to me in 30 years of knowing him, plant a doubt in my head about my own wife. I was not proud of it anymore. 14 months earlier, on an evening in September, with the light going gold and long across the field, I was standing at the edge of the driveway, wiping down my side mirrors before a run, when I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. Emmett Boyle lives a quarter mile down Sabina Road, in a small brick house his own father built the same decade mine did, and he has lived there alone since his wife passed 9 years back. He worked the postal route out of Wilmington for 41 years before he retired, walking porches and driveways in every kind of weather. And if you have ever wondered what a man notices after 41 years of walking the same roads at the same hours every single day, I can tell you now that the answer is everything. He was 79 that September. He came up the driveway slow, the way he does since his hip surgery, and he had his ball cap in both hands instead of on his head, which should have told me something all by itself. Emmett does not take his hat off for just anybody. "Wendell," he said. "Got a minute?" "Got about 5, Emmett. Heading out." He nodded and looked off toward the house for a second. And I remember thinking he seemed nervous, and I remember not asking myself why. "I have known you since you were tall enough to reach the mailbox," he said. "Known your daddy longer than that. I would not be standing in your driveway with my hat in my hand if this was not something I felt I had to say." "All right. There has been a car parked down by the Hendricks mailbox some Tuesday afternoons. Silver sedan. Man gets out and walks up through the side field the way a fellow does when he does not want to be seen coming up the road." I remember exactly how my chest felt in that moment. Tight and hot and defensive before he had even finished the sentence, the way a man gets when some part of him already suspects the truth and would rather fight the messenger than sit with it. "What are you saying to me, Emmett?" "I am saying I have seen a car and a man more than once going up toward your house on afternoons you are 3 states away, and I thought a friend ought to—" "Ought to what?" My voice came out harder than I meant it to. "Ought to walk over here and tell me my wife is—" "I did not say that." "You were about to." He held up one hand, the hat still in the other, and his voice stayed level, even though mine had not. "I am telling you what I have seen with my own 2 eyes, Wendell, because I would want somebody to tell me. That is the whole of it. What you do with it is your business." I look back on that moment now, the way you look back on a hand you should not have played, knowing exactly where every card was and still watching yourself throw the good ones away. "You are 79 years old," I said, "sitting alone in that house all day, with nothing to do but watch the road. And you have decided to make up a story about my marriage." His face changed then. Not anger. Something worse than anger. Hurt, plain and simple. The kind of hurt that comes from being accused of lying when you have gone out of your way to tell somebody a hard truth. "I have not made up one thing," he said quietly. "Get off my property, Wendell." I said, "Get off my property, Emmett. I do not want to hear another word of it." He stood there a second longer, looking at me the way you look at somebody you have known their whole life and are seeing for the first time do something you did not think they had in them. Then he put his hat back on, and he turned, and he walked back down the driveway the same slow way he had come up it, and he did not look back once. I did not speak to him again for 14 months. Not at the mailbox, not at the feed store in town. Not the one time I saw him at the funeral home for a neighbor's visitation, and made a point of standing on the other side of the room. I told Corinne about it that night before I left, because some part of me, even then, wanted her to talk me out of the doubt Emmett had planted. Wanted her to laugh it off and make it small, and let me drive off with a clear conscience. And she did exactly that. She laughed, not too hard, just enough. And she said, Emmett Boyle has been lonely since Dottie passed, and lonely people see things that are not there. And she said it with her hand on my arm and her eyes steady on mine. And I believed every word of it, because I wanted to. I drove out of that yard the next morning, feeling like a man who had defended something worth defending. Lying awake 14 months later, with a deed on the kitchen table, and my mother's voice in my ears, telling me Dale Prescott parks down by the Hendricks mailbox and walks up through the side field. I understood for the first time exactly what I had done on that porch in September. I had not defended my marriage. I had defended my own comfort, and I had made a 79-year-old man carry the cost of it alone for 14 months. And somewhere down the road, before I did another single thing about the house or the deed or any of it, I was going to have to walk back down to that little brick house and take my hat off, the way he had taken his off for me. I just did not know yet how much I was going to need him. Monday morning, I was at the Clinton County Recorder's office when it opened at 8, still in the same jacket I had worn off the truck, because I had not slept enough to think much about what I was wearing. The office sits on the second floor of the county building downtown, a room of tall windows and low counters, and the particular quiet of a place where nothing happens quickly. A woman behind the counter asked how she could help me, and I told her I needed to see everything on file for a parcel at 4419 Sabina Road. She pulled it up on a computer screen turned mostly away from me, and I watched her face while she read it, the way you watch a doctor's face while they look at test results, trying to read the outcome before anyone says a word. There is a warranty deed recorded September 17th, she said. Transferring from a Wendell Gaines to a Corinne Gaines. Is that you? That is me. I did not sign it. She looked up. She did not seem surprised exactly. I got the sense later, once I understood more about how these things work, that she had heard some version of that sentence before. I can print you the recorded document and the notary acknowledgement, she said.
That is public record. Whether it was properly executed is not something I can tell you. That would be a legal question.
Who notarized it? She turned the screen a little more toward herself, scrolled, then read off a name. Tricia Vance. I did not know the name yet. I would come to know it very well. Is there anything else attached? Anything that shows how the deed was prepared? She printed several pages and slid them across the counter. The deed itself, 2 pages. The notary acknowledgement, a single page with a raised seal and Tricia Vance's signature, and a Clinton County Commission number. And a 3rd page I almost missed, a preliminary title report prepared for a buyer. I read that 3rd page standing right there at the counter, and the floor did the same thing it had done in my own driveway 2 days before. The title report was prepared for a company called Meridian Logistics Partners, dated 3 weeks after the deed was recorded. It listed the parcel at 4419 Sabina Road as under contract for purchase, contingent on rezoning approval from Clinton County. Sale price, $640,000. This says the house is under contract to sell, I said. The clerk leaned over and looked at the page I was holding. That would explain the survey crew you mentioned. A logistics company doing due diligence on a rezone usually orders a boundary survey early before they spend real money on the rest of it. They cannot rezone farmland into whatever this is without a public hearing. Can they? There would be a planning commission hearing, yes. It would be posted. She thought a moment. If you want, I can tell you how to check the commission's docket. It is public. I stood in that office for another 20 minutes, with pages spread across the counter, and piece by piece a shape started to come together. That was worse than anything Corinne had explained to me at the kitchen table. This was not a favor from a family friend rearranging paperwork for Medicaid planning. This was a sale. $640,000. A logistics company wanted my father's land for a warehouse, and somebody had put a deed in front of a notary with my forged signature on it 3 weeks before that company signed a contract to buy it. I asked the clerk one more question before I left. If a deed has a forged signature on it, what happens to it legally? She held up both hands, the universal sign for, I am not a lawyer. That is outside what I can tell you, but I will say this much, because I have worked here 14 years, and I have seen a few of these come through. If you believe that signature is not yours, you do not wait. Paper moves fast once money is involved. And once that logistics company closes and takes title from your wife, getting it back becomes a whole different fight than getting it back before they close. I thanked her and gathered up the pages and walked back out into a cold parking lot under a flat gray sky. And I sat in my truck for a long time before I turned the key. I had left the house that morning with one question. Did I sign that deed? Somewhere between the county building's front steps and that counter on the second floor, the question had grown into something with a great deal more weight to it. Who else was involved? How long had this been planned? And how much time did I actually have before $640,000 changed hands and took my mother's flower bed, my father's walnut trees, and the only home I had ever known along with it? I thought about calling Corinne. I did not. I thought about calling a lawyer. I did not have one, and I did not yet have the money to hire the kind of lawyer this was starting to look like it would need. Instead, I sat in that cold truck cab, and I called the one number I actually trusted. The dispatcher, who had kept my logs straight for 11 years and who I knew better than almost anyone left in my life, would tell me the plain truth without dressing it up. The line rang twice. Gaines Ray Kowalczyk said, "You are not due back out till Thursday. Something wrong with the truck?" "Nothing wrong with the truck, Ray," I said. "I need to ask you something about my logs." Ray did not have an answer for me on the phone that day. Not a real one. He said the electronic logs were federal record, kept for compliance, and he thought the retention window was 6 months, but he was not certain past that. And he told me to come by the yard when I could, and he would pull up whatever the system still had. I drove home from the recorder's office with that third piece of the puzzle sitting heavy in my chest. And when I came up the driveway, Corinne's car was gone. She had a Monday shift at the dental office in Blanchester, which meant the house was quiet, except for the television murmuring in my mother's room. I found her sitting up in bed the way I had left her 3 days before, except worse. Her color was not good. There was a faint blue tint at her lips that had not been there the last time I paid close attention, and her breathing had a small catch in it every few words that I did not like at all. "You look tired," she said before I had said a single word. I went to the county building. She patted the bed, and I sat, and I told her everything. The forged deed, Tricia Vance's name on the notary block, the title report for Meridian Logistics Partners, and the number attached to it. $640,000 for 3.8 acres and a farmhouse her husband built with his own hands. She listened without interrupting, which is not like her, and when I finished, she was quiet a long moment, staring at the far wall, where a photograph of my father hung, taken the year the house went up. Him standing in front of bare studs, with a level in one hand and a grin on his face. $640,000. She repeated softly. For a warehouse. That is what the paper said. Your father would not know what to do with that number. A small, sad laugh. He built that house for $11,000 and thought he had overspent. Mama, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think hard before you answer, because it matters more than it might sound like it does. She nodded. You said Corinne had that man in the house more than she had me. How long has that been going on? Do you have any sense of it? Her hand went to the edge of the quilt, working the loose thread the way it does. She did not answer right away, and I could see her weighing something, deciding how much to hand me at once. I first noticed it maybe 2 years back, she said finally. A Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday is when the home health nurse used to come check my blood pressure before they cut that program, and I was sitting right here by the window waiting on her, and I saw a car I did not know pull up by the Hendricks mailbox, and a man get out and cross the field. 2 years. I did not know what I was looking at then, Wendell, truly. I thought it was strange, a stranger cutting across a neighbor's field instead of using the road like a normal person. But I did not have a name to put to the strangeness. It took a long while, watching it happen again and again on the Tuesdays and sometimes the Thursdays before I understood what I was seeing. 2 years, I said again, because I needed to hear myself say it before it would sit right in my chest. I am sorry, son. Her voice cracked slightly on the word son, which she does not do often. I told you I did not have proof, and that was true. But I want to be honest with you now, that I also did not have the courage. You were already gone so much of every year. I did not want to be the one who took the rest of it away from you too. I reached over and took her hand. The same hand that had dug that iris bed with a trowel because a tiller would tear the roots. And I held it for a while, without saying anything, because there was nothing to say that would make either one of us feel better in that moment. The doctor called Friday while you were still out on your run, she said after a while. The one from the heart clinic in Wilmington. He wants to talk about my numbers. Said there might be a procedure to talk about, sooner rather than later. Something cold moved through me that had nothing to do with the deed, or the money, or Dale Prescott. What kind of procedure? He would not say much on the phone. Said he wanted us in the office. I have an appointment Thursday at 10. I will be there. You have a run Thursday. I will be there, Mama. She squeezed my hand, and for a moment, she looked less like a woman fighting for her heart, and more like the woman who used to stand at the stove making my breakfast before school. Steady and certain of things. Wendell, she said, whatever is happening with this house, I need you to understand something. I do not care about the walls or the acreage. I have had 82 good years, and I will be all right wherever I end up sleeping. What I care about is that your father built this place so his family would always have somewhere solid to stand. And I will not have somebody take that out from under you through a lie. Not while I still have breath enough to do something about it. What can you do about it, Mama? She looked at me a long moment, and something flickered behind those pale blue eyes that I had not seen in a good long while. Something sharper than I usually gave her credit for. Bring me my sewing box tomorrow, she said. The tin one on the top shelf of my closet. I believe it is time you and I had a look at what your father left in there. I did not sleep well that night. And by 6 the next morning, I was standing in the yard office at the trucking company. A low cinder block building that smelled like coffee and diesel exhaust. Waiting on Ray Kowalczyk to finish a call. Ray and I go back 11 years. He is 60, built like a man who spent 30 years loading freight before he ever sat behind a dispatch desk. With reading glasses he is always losing on top of his own head. He has kept my logs straight through 2 different electronic systems and 1 lawsuit involving a fender bender that was not my fault. And if there is a man in that yard who does not lie to me, it is him. He waved me back to his desk once he hung up. You sounded rattled on the phone yesterday, he said. What is going on? I told him. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. The deed, the date, the 1,100 miles between me and a notary's office in Wilmington, Ohio on September 17th. Ray's face went from curious to serious somewhere in the middle of that sentence. You want your ELD data for September 17th. I want to know if you can even get it. He turned to his computer and started typing. And I watched his face while he worked instead of watching the screen, because I did not trust myself to read it right if I looked at it directly. Electronic logging devices are federal mandate, he said, half to himself, half to me. Carriers have to keep the data available for review, but the retention requirement is only 6 months from the date of the record. After that, it rolls off the primary system. September was 2 months ago. September is fine. September we have. He kept typing. It is October and November I would be worried about eventually, but you are asking about September, so we are inside the window. I felt something in my chest ease for the first time in 3 days. And then Ray made a small sound, not quite a word, and I felt it clench right back up. What? Give me a second. He leaned closer to the screen. You had a system update in late September. New telematics vendor company-wide. We switched providers because the old one kept losing satellite connection out in the mountain routes. Migration happened the 22nd. I do not follow you, Ray. I am saying the data exists, but I need to check whether it migrated clean or whether September got clipped in the changeover. It happens sometimes. Not often, but it happens. He kept clicking. Give me a minute. I stood there in that cinder block office, with my heart going harder than it had any right to over a computer screen. And Ray worked in silence for what felt like a very long time. Finally, he sat back. Good news and bad news, he said. Give me the good first. The good news is, I have got you. September 17th, full day. GPS breadcrumb trail and drive time logged in 15-minute intervals like it is supposed to be. You picked up a load in Fort Worth on the 16th, drove northeast, and at 2:04 in the afternoon on the 17th, which I am guessing is close to whatever time is stamped on that notary block you are asking about, you were parked at a truck stop just west of Amarillo, Texas, logged as an off-duty rest break. He turned the monitor so I could see it. A little red dot sitting on a stretch of Inter 40 nowhere near Ohio, nowhere near anything but flat Texas horizon. I stood there looking at that red dot like it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. What is the bad news? I asked, because I could hear it was still coming. The bad news is this data lives on our internal system, and it is not going to mean much of anything in a courtroom, sitting on a screen in my office. If you need this to hold up, you are going to want it certified. There is a formal process a records custodian has to pull it and sign an affidavit that it came straight off the device without anybody touching it. Takes a little time, costs a little money, but it is bulletproof once it is done right. How long? Depends how fast legal wants to move on their end, but figure a week, maybe 2 if we push. A week or 2. I thought about my mother's cardiology appointment the next morning. I thought about a title company somewhere finalizing paperwork on $640,000. I thought about a logistics company waiting on a rezoning hearing that could, for all I knew, already be scheduled and posted somewhere I had not thought to look yet. Ray, I said, can you print me what is on that screen right now? Informal. Just so I have something in my hand today, while we get the real version started. Already doing it. The printer in the corner started up. Wendell, I have known you a long time. You want to tell me what is actually going on here, or you want to just keep letting me guess? I looked at him a long moment. Ray had covered for me on more late deliveries than I could count, had talked a dispatcher out of writing me up over a missed window that was not my fault, had never once in 11 years asked me a question he did not have a right to ask. My wife had a deed drawn up with my name forged on it, I said, to sell my father's house out from under my mother while I was 3 states away hauling somebody else's freight. Ray did not say anything for a moment. Then he reached over, pulled the warm pages off the printer, squared them into a neat stack, and handed them to me across the desk. Then you are going to need more than 1 week, he said. You are going to need everything I have got. Tell me what you need next. I did not go straight home from the yard that morning. I sat in the truck in the parking lot for a while, with those printed pages on the seat beside me. And I thought hard about how I wanted this next conversation to go. I had spent 3 days gathering pieces. The deed, the date, the title report, the ELD data. Every one of them on its own could be explained away the way Corinne had explained away the deed itself at the kitchen table, smooth and quick and almost believable. I decided I was not going to hand her the pieces one at a time anymore. I was going to lay them all out at once and watch what she did with the whole picture. She was home when I got there, her car back in its normal spot instead of crooked in the grass, which told me something too, though I could not have said exactly what. She was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea when I came in, and she looked up, and I watched her take in my face and adjust her own to match whatever she saw there. "You went to the yard," she said. It was not a question. I did. "Wendell, we do not need to keep doing this. I explained the deed. I know you do not love the way it happened, but it was done to protect your mother, and I would think—" I set the pages down on the table in front of her. All of them. The recorded deed with the notary block circled in pen. The title report with Meridian Logistics Partners and $640,000 circled too. And on top, the printout from Ray's screen. That little red dot sitting on Interstate 40 outside Amarillo, Texas, time-stamped 2:04 in the afternoon on September 17th. She looked at the pages. She did not touch them. "What is this?" she said, and her voice had lost some of its smoothness for the first time since this whole thing started. "That is where I was standing, Corinne. At the exact hour a notary in Wilmington claims she watched me sign my name to that deed. Federal record off my truck. 2:04 in the afternoon, west of Amarillo, Texas. 1,100 miles from here." She was quiet a long moment. I watched her eyes move over the pages, and I watched her mind working behind them. And I understood, watching, that I was not looking at a woman who was confused or caught off guard. I was looking at a woman doing arithmetic, trying to figure out how much I actually had and how much I was bluffing. "You do not understand how these things work," she said finally. Careful again, rebuilding the calm one brick at a time. "Tricia would not have notarized something without proper identification in front of her. There has to be an explanation. Maybe the date on the record is wrong. Recorders' offices make clerical errors constantly." "And the title report. Is that a clerical error too? $640,000, Corinne. A rezoning application. That is not paperwork for Medicaid planning. That is a sale." Her jaw tightened. For just a second, the smoothness cracked all the way through, and what came out from underneath it was not fear anymore. It was something closer to anger, the kind that comes from being caught rather than the kind that comes from being wronged. "You have no idea what this family has been dealing with," she said low and fast. "You are gone 300 days a year, Wendell. 300! Do you have any idea what it costs to keep your mother in this house, with her care, with the appointments, with everything the insurance will not touch? Do you have any idea what it is like to sit alone in this kitchen every single night, doing the math on money that is not there?" "So you sold my father's house. I was going to sell my share of a decision we should have made together years ago, if you had ever once been present enough to make it with me." Her voice cracked on the last words, and for a moment, I almost believed the crack was real. And then I remembered the fold-over collar sweater and the man crossing the Hendricks field for 2 years running, and the almost belief went cold in my chest. "Where does Dale Prescott fit into $640,000? I said quietly. That landed. I watched it land. Her face went still in a way I had never seen it go still before, and for one long moment, neither one of us said anything at all. The only sound in that kitchen, the tick of the clock over the stove, and somewhere down the hall the faint murmur of my mother's television. "You should ask him yourself," she said finally, and her voice had gone somewhere flat and dangerous. I had never heard it go in 22 years of marriage. "Since apparently you have decided to spend all your time collecting evidence instead of talking to your own wife." "I tried talking to you, Corinne. 3 days ago, right here at this table. And you told me a story about Medicaid that was not true." She stood up so fast the chair scraped hard against the floor, and for a second I thought she might come at me. And then she caught herself, straightened her sweater, and picked her teacup up off the table with a hand I could see was not quite steady. "You have no idea what you are about to do to this family," she said. And she walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs, and a moment later I heard the bedroom door close. Not slammed, just closed. Quiet and final. The way a door sounds when somebody on the other side of it has decided the conversation is over. I sat alone at that kitchen table for a long time after that, looking at the pages spread out in front of me. And I understood that whatever certainty I had walked in with had just been replaced by something more dangerous. She had not denied Dale Prescott's name. She had told me to ask him myself. I picked up my phone, and for reasons I still cannot fully explain, my thumb went not to Dale's number, which I did not have, but backward into a folder of old video files I had not opened in almost a year, looking for something I already half remembered and did not want to find. I left the house that evening. I could not sit in that kitchen any longer, with the bedroom door closed upstairs and my mother's television murmuring down the hall. So I walked out to the truck, climbed up into the cab, and sat there in the yard with the dome light on. Going through a phone I suddenly did not trust myself to be holding. I want to explain something about the cameras before I go further, because it matters to what I found. The company had put dash cameras in all the trucks about 3 years back, forward-facing and cab-facing both, mostly for insurance purposes in case of an accident where fault needed proving. The footage uploaded automatically to a cloud folder tied to my account, and I almost never looked at it. Most drivers do not. It just sits there, recording your life on the road in the background, days of empty highway nobody ever watches. I remembered one clip specifically, though I had spent the better part of a year not remembering it on purpose. It was from the previous June, a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday I would not have thought twice about, except for one thing. I had come home a day early that week. A load had fallen through in Dayton, and rather than sit in a truck stop waiting on a reload, I had driven the extra 90 minutes home, thinking I would surprise Corinne, thinking it would be a nice thing to do for a woman who was always managing the house and my mother alone. The forward camera on the truck, mounted high on the dash, has a wide field of view. It catches the driveway when I pull in. That June morning, coming up Sabina Road a little before 6, the camera caught something else first, before it ever caught the house. A silver sedan pulling out of my own driveway, turning away from me, moving fast. At the time, I had told myself it was nothing. A delivery. Somebody turned around in the wrong driveway. I remember pulling in behind it, finding the house quiet. Corinne in the kitchen in her robe, looking surprised to see me. And I remember asking her, casual, half joking, whose car that was pulling out. And I remember her saying, without missing a beat, that it was the home health nurse running behind schedule, in for my mother. I had believed her. I had not thought about it again until that clip surfaced, somewhere in the back of my mind 11 months later, sitting in the truck stop outside Amarillo, with nothing to do but wait on a reload, some idle itch making me want to look at it again, just to see. I found the clip. I watched it. 6:02 in the morning, a silver sedan backing out fast, turning onto the county road, gone. And in the corner of the frame, for just a second, before the car cleared the shot, I could make out enough of the plate to know it was not a nurse's car, not a home health company vehicle with any kind of magnetic sign or logo. Just a plain silver sedan, driven by somebody in a hurry to be somewhere else before 6 in the morning. I remember sitting in that truck stop parking lot outside Amarillo, engine running, watching that 10-second clip 3 times over, feeling something cold settle into my stomach that I did not want to name. And then I had done something I am not proud of. something I have turned over in my mind more times than I can count since. I deleted it, not by accident, on purpose. I opened the settings, found the clip in the cloud folder, and I deleted it. And I told myself I was deleting it because it was nothing, because a man does not keep evidence against his own wife over a mistaken guess about a nurse's car. Because if I kept looking at it, I was going to start seeing things that were not there. I know now that was not why I deleted it. I deleted it because some part of me, 11 months before I ever stood in that driveway looking at a forged deed, already suspected exactly what that car was, and I did not have the courage to sit with the suspicion. It was easier to erase the question than to answer it. Sitting in that same cab 6 months later, with my marriage falling apart in real time in the house behind me, I understood that I had done to myself exactly what I had done to Emmett Boyle on that porch. I had taken the one piece of evidence that might have told me the truth early, and I had thrown it away, because the truth was inconvenient, and I had called an old man a liar for trying to hand me the same information a different way. I sat there a long while, with my thumb hovering over the empty space in that cloud folder where the clip used to be, and a thought started forming that I could not shake loose once it took hold. Deleted did not necessarily mean gone. Not on a company system, not on a cloud server backed up somewhere I did not fully understand. I did not know enough about how any of it worked to say for certain, but I knew somebody who might. I picked up my phone and called Ray a second time that day, and when he answered, sounding tired, I said the only thing I could think to say. Ray, I need to ask you something else, and I already know it is going to sound strange. Does the company keep backups of the dash camera footage? Even the parts a driver deletes? There was a pause on the other end, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Wendell? Ray said finally, slow and careful. What exactly did you delete? I told Ray everything, standing in the yard by then, having climbed back down out of the cab because I could not sit still while I talked. The June clip, the silver sedan, the home health nurse explanation I had swallowed whole. The delete button I had pressed with my own thumb. Ray was quiet for a while after I finished. Then he said the system might keep a backup, might not, depending on how the cloud provider's retention policy worked, and whether a deleted file got purged immediately or sat in some kind of holding period first. And he said he did not know enough about it himself to promise me anything. But he knew somebody in the IT department who might, and he would make a call in the morning. I thanked him and hung up, and I was still standing there in the cold with the phone in my hand when it rang again. And I saw my daughter's name on the screen, and for one foolish second I let myself think this was going to be easy, that Delia, calling out of nowhere on a Tuesday night, meant something good. "Dad," she said, before I had even gotten a full hello out. "Mom called me. She is really upset." Delia is 26 lives in Columbus, works in a marketing office downtown, and she has her mother's quickness and her mother's way of getting to a point before you are ready for it. I love my daughter. I want to say that plainly before I tell you the rest of this conversation. Because what happened on that phone call still hurts to think about, and none of the hurt changes how I feel about her. "I imagine she is," I said. "She said you accused her of having an affair. In front of everybody, basically going through her things, printing out documents like you were building some kind of case against her." "I did not accuse her of anything, Delia. I asked her a question about a deed with my forged signature on it, and I showed her proof of where I actually was on the day it says I signed it." "Dad, come on. You have been gone your whole life. You know that, right? You know that is not nothing." "I know it," I said, and I meant it. And I want you to understand I was not arguing that point with her. I am not saying I have been perfect, but being gone, driving a truck to put food on this table is not the same thing as forging a man's signature to sell his father's house out from under him. Maybe she really did think it was for Grandma, for the Medicaid thing. Maybe somebody gave her bad advice and she made a mistake trying to protect this family while you were 3 states away. And instead of talking to her about it like a husband, you went and got a lawyer's worth of paperwork together to use against her. I have not hired a lawyer. That is not the point. I stood there in the cold yard, with my breath fogging in front of me, and I felt something in my chest that I had not expected. A kind of loneliness that went deeper than anything the deed or the affair or the $640,000 had put in me yet. My own daughter, standing on the other side of a phone call, had already decided which one of her parents was telling the truth, and it was not me. "Delia," I said, keeping my voice as even as I could. "There is a man named Dale Prescott. Your mother would not deny it when I asked her directly. There is a car that has been parking down by the Hendricks place for 2 years, according to your grandmother, who has watched it from her bedroom window because she does not have much else to do these days but watch that field." Grandma is 82 years old, Dad. She gets confused. Her mind is sharper than mine most days. You are choosing to believe the version where Mom is a villain because it is easier than looking at your own part in any of this. Her voice cracked just slightly, and I could hear that underneath the anger there was something closer to grief. A daughter watching the 2 halves of her childhood come apart from opposite ends of a phone line. "You were gone for my whole life, Dad. 300 days a year. I used to make a paper chain every September, counting down to Thanksgiving, because that was the next time I knew for sure you would be home." I had not known about the paper chain. 26 years, and I had not known about the paper chain. And hearing it then, in the middle of everything else, nearly took the legs out from under me. "I am sorry about that," I said quietly. "I am. I have thought a great deal these last few days about all the ways I was not there, and I am not going to stand here and tell you I do not owe you and your mother both an apology for that. But Delia being gone is not the same thing as what is on that deed. One of those things is a man failing at something he was trying to do right. The other one is a crime." She did not say anything for a long moment. "I have to go," she said finally. "Mom is upset. I am going to go sit with her." "Delia, I love you, Dad. I just think you need to slow down and think about what you are doing to this family before you cannot take it back." The line went dead. I stood in that yard a long time after looking up at the dark shape of the house against a sky with no moon in it, thinking about a paper chain I had never once seen hanging in my own kitchen. And I understood that whatever came next, I was not just fighting to save a piece of land. I was fighting for the truth to matter more than the easiest story, in a family where the easiest story had already found a home in the one person besides my mother whose opinion of me I had ever really cared about. I did not go back inside the house that night. I climbed up into the cab, pulled a blanket out from behind the seat, and slept there, in the driveway, engine off. Cold enough by 4 in the morning that I woke up with my breath fogging inside the cab and my hands stiff on the wheel where they had fallen when I drifted off. I want to tell you about that morning honestly, because I think there is a version of this story where I could make myself sound stronger than I was. And I would rather just tell you the truth. I sat in that cab as the sky went gray, and then pale, and then finally light. And I did not feel like a man building a case. I felt like a man who had lost the thread on every single relationship that mattered to him at once. My wife was upstairs, behind a closed door with a lie I could not get her to drop. My daughter believed the lie. My mother's heart was failing on a schedule nobody had given me yet. The one man who had tried to warn me honestly. I had run off my own porch and not spoken to in over a year. And the one piece of evidence I might have had early, the clearest piece, I had deleted with my own thumb because I did not want to know. I thought about just letting it go. I want to say that plainly because I think a man ought to be honest about the moment he came closest to quitting. I thought about it sitting in that cab in the gray morning light, running the numbers the way you run numbers on a load that is not going to pay out. Even if I won, Even if every piece of paper lined up exactly the way I needed it to, what would I actually have at the end of it? A house? A piece of land? A marriage that was already over in every way that mattered, whether a judge ever said so or not. A daughter who had already chosen a side. 28 years of driving 300 days a year to provide for a family that had somewhere along the way, and without my noticing, stopped needing me to provide anything but a paycheck and an absence. I sat there long enough that the sun came all the way up over the walnut trees my father planted, throwing long shadows across a driveway that still had a bare patch of dirt where a survey stake had stood in my mother's flowers 3 days before. And then I thought about my mother, sitting up in that downstairs bedroom, 82 years old, with a heart that was failing on its own schedule, telling me the day before that whatever was happening with the house, she did not care about the walls or the acreage. She had said something else, too. Something I had let pass by in the moment because there was so much else crowding in around it. I will not have somebody take that out from under you through a lie. Not while I still have breath enough to do something about it. She had asked me to bring her the sewing tin. I climbed down out of that cab, stiff and cold and unshowered, and instead of going into the house through the kitchen, I walked the long way around, past the iris bed with its bare patch of dirt, past the walnut trees, out to the end of the driveway where it meets the county road. And I stood there for a minute, looking down Sabina Road in the direction of a small brick house a quarter-mile off. The one place in this whole mess where I had actually done something wrong to somebody who had done nothing wrong to me. I am not a man who finds it easy to admit a mistake out loud to another person's face. I want to be honest about that, too. 28 years of driving alone gives a man a great deal of time to be right inside his own head, and not nearly enough practice being wrong out loud where somebody else can hear it. But I stood at the end of that driveway a long while, looking down the road at Emmett Boyle's house, and I thought about a 79-year-old man standing on my porch with his hat in both hands, working up the courage to tell me something he did not want to tell me, because he had decided that being a good neighbor mattered more than being a comfortable one. I thought about the 41 years he had walked the mail route in every kind of weather, noticing things the way a careful man notices things when nobody expects him to be paying attention. I thought about the fact that if my mother was right, if Dale Prescott had been crossing that side field for 2 years running, on Tuesdays mostly, and sometimes Thursdays, there was a very good chance that a man who had spent 4 decades watching that exact stretch of road for a living had noticed a great deal more than my mother ever could from a bedroom window. I did not have proof yet. I did not have Ray's certified logs, and I did not know yet whether the camera footage could be recovered. And I did not have whatever my father had left in that sewing tin. What I had was a road and a house at the end of it, and an old man I owed an apology to before I could ask him for anything at all. I turned and started walking. I did not make it to Emmett's house that morning. I got about halfway down Sabina Road before my phone rang, and it was a number I did not recognize. A local area code, and I almost let it go to voicemail before something made me answer. "Wendell, this is Marguerite Prescott." I stopped walking. Stood right there on the gravel shoulder of the county road with the walnut trees behind me and a cold wind coming across the harvested field, and for a second I could not think of a single thing to say. "I know this is strange," she went on quickly, like she had rehearsed it and wanted to get through it before she lost her nerve. "I got your number off the church directory a long time ago for the cookout, and I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to decide whether to use it. I'm at the Kroger on Rombach. Is there any chance you could meet me here, just for a few minutes?" I did not ask her what it was about. Some part of me already knew, the same part of me that had known 11 months ago what that silver sedan pulling out of my own driveway actually meant before I deleted the proof of it. "Give me 15 minutes, I said. I drove instead of walked, and I found her sitting in her car at the far edge of the parking lot, away from the cart corral and the foot traffic, engine running for the heat. She is 47, a woman I had met maybe 4 or 5 times over the years at church functions. And the one cookout always struck me as quiet, watchful. The kind of person who says less in a room than she is actually thinking. She rolled her window down when she saw my truck, and I parked next to her and got out and stood by her door instead of getting in, because something in me was not ready to sit inside a car with this conversation yet. I want to say up front that I do not know everything, she said. I want to be honest about that because I think you deserve honesty more than almost anybody in this whole situation, and I have not been very good about giving it to people lately. All right. Dale has been different for about 2 years. Distracted. Gone more than his work explains, and when I ask him about it, he gets short with me in a way he never used to. She was gripping the steering wheel with both hands, even though the car was not moving. I found a text message on his phone back in the spring. It was not explicit, nothing like that, just a time and a place. But it was signed with a heart, and it was not signed with my name. Corinne. I did not know for certain. I told myself it could be anybody. I did not want it to be your wife, Wendell, because your wife has been my closest friend for 11 years, and I did not want to lose that on the strength of one text message I was not even supposed to see. I stood there in that cold parking lot, and I felt something strange move through me. Not satisfaction exactly, nothing that clean, but a kind of grim recognition. The feeling of watching a picture you have been squinting at for days finally resolve into focus. There is something else, Marguerite said, quieter now. About 3 weeks ago, Dale came home late from the branch, and I asked him where he had been. And he said he had been at the title company handling paperwork for a land deal. He said it like it was nothing, the kind of thing he does all the time for the bank. But he was strange about it after. Nervous, in a way I had not seen him nervous in a long time. He kept saying somebody named Tricia owed him a favor, and this had better be the last one. My chest went tight. Tricia Vance. Marguerite looked up at me sharply. You know that name. She is the notary on the deed. The one with my forged signature on it. Marguerite closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there were tears standing in them that had not been there a minute before. I am so sorry, she said. I should have called you the day I found that text message. I told myself it was not my business, that maybe I was wrong, that confronting it would blow up 2 families over something that might turn out to be nothing. I was protecting myself, Wendell, not you and not your mother. I want you to know that I understand that now. Why are you telling me now? Because Dale came home last night and told me the sale is closing soon. He said it like a man relieved a burden was about to be lifted off him. And I realized that if I stayed quiet 1 more week to protect my own marriage, I was going to be complicit in taking your mother's house away from her while she is sick. I could not carry that. I would rather lose my marriage honestly than keep it by staying silent about this. I stood there a long moment in that cold parking lot, looking at a woman who had just handed me, without meaning to make it sound this way, the second half of everything Emmett Boyle had tried to hand me on my own porch 14 months earlier. Marguerite, I said, I need you to tell me everything you know about Tricia Vance, and I need you to tell me exactly when you think this sale is supposed to close. She nodded, wiped her eyes with the back of one hand, and started talking. And for the first time in 4 days, I felt the shape of the whole thing. The deed, and the notary, and the title company, and the 2 years of Tuesdays come together into something I could actually fight, instead of something I could only stand inside of and take. Marguerite told me what she knew standing in that parking lot for another 20 minutes. And by the time I drove away, I had a rough shape of the whole arrangement. Dale had a relationship with Tricia Vance going back years, some kind of professional favor system between the bank and her notary practice that had nothing to do with my family, until Dale decided to use it. He had brought Corinne to Tricia directly, cutting out any title company that might have asked harder questions about a deed with no husband present at signing. And the buyer, Meridian Logistics Partners, was a company Dale's bank had done financing work for before, which was likely how the whole thing got connected in the first place. None of it was proof yet. It was direction. But direction was more than I had walked into that parking lot with. And I drove back down Sabina Road with a clearer head than I had carried in 4 days. I did not go home. I turned instead onto the gravel drive of a small brick house a quarter-mile down the road. And I sat in my truck for a minute looking at it before I made myself get out. Emmett's truck was in the drive. An old Ford he has kept running longer than most men keep a marriage. I walked up to the porch, the same porch, and for a second I stood there, the way he must have stood 14 months before, working up the nerve to say something I did not want to say. I knocked. It took a while before the door opened, and when it did, Emmett stood there in a flannel shirt with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. And his face did not do anything I expected. It did not light up with relief, and it did not close down with anger either. It just watched me, careful, the way you watch weather that might turn either direction. "Wendell," he said. "Emmett, I owe you an apology, and I would like to give it to you properly, if you will let me." He studied me a long moment. Then he stepped back from the door and held it open, which was more than I had any right to expect. "Come on in then," he said. "Coffee's on." His kitchen was small and neat, the kind of neat that comes from a man living alone and taking care of the little he has, because there is nobody else there to take care of it with him. There was a photograph on the wall of a woman I took to be his wife, Dottie, younger, laughing at something outside the frame. He poured 2 cups without asking if I wanted one, and set them on the table and sat down across from me. 14 months, he said, not unkindly, just stating it. That is a long time for 2 neighbors not to speak. I know it. You want to tell me why you were here? I set my coffee down and made myself look at him while I said it, because a man does not deserve an apology mumbled at his own kitchen table. You stood on my porch 14 months ago and tried to tell me something true, and I called you a liar, and I told you to get off my property. And I have thought about that day almost every single day since, and I am ashamed of how I handled it. I stopped because my voice had gone rougher than I wanted it to. You were right, Emmett, about the car, about all of it. I found out 4 days ago the hard way. And the first thing I thought about, before I thought about anything else, was you standing on that porch with your hat in your hands. Emmett was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table. I did not come to your porch that day looking to be right, he said finally. I came because I thought a friend deserved to know something before it cost him everything. It cost you anyway. I imagine that is the part that stings worst. It is. I am not going to pretend it did not hurt the way you spoke to me. I am 79 years old, Wendell. I have buried a wife and most of the men I served with, and I have made my peace with a good deal in this life. But I will tell you honestly, I did not sleep well the night you ran me off your property. I went home, and I sat in this kitchen, and I wondered if I had been wrong to say anything at all. And then I wondered if I had said it wrong, and I turned it over so many ways, I finally just had to let it be. I am sorry. I know you are. I can see it plain enough on your face, and that is worth something to me. More than something. He looked at me steady across the table. But I am going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer, because I did not get one the last time we talked about this. Why are you really here, Wendell? Is it to make yourself feel better about how you treated an old man? Or is it because you need something from me now that you did not need 4 days ago? It was a fair question, and it deserved a fair answer. And I gave him one. Both, I said. I am here because I owe you an apology, whether I need anything from you or not. And I would have come today, even if I did not need a single other thing from you as long as I live. But I will not lie to you and pretend I do not also need your help. My mother's house is being sold out from under her with a forged deed, and I have reason to believe you have been watching that road for 2 years. And I think you might have seen things nobody else in this family had the eyes or the ears to notice. Emmett sat back in his chair, and for the first time since I had walked through his door, something like a small, tired smile crossed his face. 41 years I walked routes in this county, he said. Rain, snow, heat that would peel paint off a barn. A man notices things after that long, whether he means to or not. He stood up, walked over to a roll-top desk in the corner of the kitchen, and pulled open a drawer. Come here, Wendell. I want to show you something I have been keeping since April of 2022. And I think it is time somebody besides me finally looked at it. Emmett came back to the table carrying a composition notebook, the kind with a black and white marbled cover, worn soft at the corners from handling. There were rubber bands around the outside, holding a handful of loose pages in place. And I could see the edge of the cover was cracked from being folded open and closed 1,000 times. When I worked the route, he said, sitting back down, I kept notes. Every carrier does in one form or another. You have to when you are covering the same 300 boxes 6 days a week for 41 years. You start noticing patterns, and if you do not write them down, your head gets too full to hold them all. Which house gets a package left on the porch versus at the side door? Which dog you do not turn your back on? Which elderly folks you knock instead of just leaving mail? Because if nobody answers 3 days running, that is worth a phone call to somebody. He opened the notebook to a page marked with a rubber band and slid it across the table toward me. I retired from the route 11 years ago, he said. But old habits do not retire with you. I still walk most mornings, still notice things. And about 2 years back, I started noticing something on this road that did not sit right with me. And out of 41 years of habit, I wrote it down. I looked at the page. It was dated, each line in small, careful handwriting. A log the way I imagine a man who spent his whole working life logging things would keep one. Even for something that was not officially his business at all. April 14th. Silver sedan, Hendricks mailbox, 1:40 p.m. Man on foot, side field toward Gaines property. April 21st. Same vehicle, same location, 1:15 p.m. May 3rd. Same, 1:50 p.m. The entries went on. Not every week, but often a Tuesday, and then a Thursday, and then a stretch of nothing for 3 weeks, and then a Tuesday again, spanning nearly 2 years, each one with a date and a time, and the same short description. A silver sedan, a man crossing the field, always arriving after my truck would have already left the yard. And always, I noticed, gone again well before I would have made it back. You kept this for 2 years, I said, and my voice did not come out steady. I did not know what it was building toward, Emmett said. I want to be honest with you about that. I did not sit here plotting some kind of case against your wife. I am an old man with a habit of writing down what I see, same as I did for 41 years on the job. But somewhere along the way, I started to understand that whatever this was, it was not nothing. And I thought, if the day ever came that it mattered, I would rather have it written down than trust my memory alone. I turned the pages slowly. Near the back, one entry stopped me cold. September 17th. Silver sedan, Hendricks mailbox, 12:50 p.m. Man on foot toward Gaines property. Also separate vehicle, dark sedan, unfamiliar, parked briefly in Gaines' driveway. Approximately 1:30 to 2:15 p.m. Left before Wendell's wife's car returned from town. I read it 3 times. Emmett, this says there was a second car in my driveway on September 17th, between 1:30 and 2:15 in the afternoon. That is what I saw. I did not know whose car it was, and I am not in the habit of writing down license plates off vehicles I do not recognize, unless something about the situation feels like it warrants it. I was walking my usual morning route, and I noticed it on my way back through, and I wrote it down because it was not a car I had seen before, and because your own truck was nowhere in sight, and your wife's car was gone as well. Which struck me as an odd hour for a stranger's car to be sitting in your driveway with nobody home. I sat there with that notebook in my hands, doing the math I had already half done with Ray's data. 2:04 in the afternoon, on September 17th, I had been parked at a truck stop outside Amarillo, Texas. According to Emmett's notebook, an unfamiliar dark sedan had been sitting in my driveway from 1:30 to 2:15 that same afternoon, while I was 1,100 miles away. And Corinne's car, by Emmett's account, was also gone. A notary would need a driver's license and a physical presence to properly execute an acknowledgement. If that unfamiliar sedan belonged to Tricia Vance, and if the notary block on that deed was dated and timed to align with an afternoon when I was provably in Texas, and Corinne was provably not even home then, whatever had happened in that driveway had happened without me, and very possibly without any legitimate signature at all. Only a document made to look like one. "Emmett," I said slowly, "I think you may have just handed me the second half of everything I have been trying to prove for 4 days." He looked at me a long moment, and something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, but was close enough to be its cousin. 41 years of writing things down nobody asked me to write," he said. "I used to wonder toward the end of my career whether the habit had gotten a little foolish. An old man scribbling in a notebook out of nothing but stubbornness. I do not wonder that anymore." He reached across the table and closed his hand briefly over mine. A short, firm grip, the kind two men give each other instead of the words that are harder to say. "Whatever you need from this notebook, Wendell, it is yours. And whatever else you need from me, you have only to ask. This time, I expect you will." I left Emmett's house with the notebook wrapped carefully in a plastic grocery bag he insisted on tucked under my arm, like something that might break. And I drove straight to the yard instead of home, because Ray had called twice while I was sitting at Emmett's kitchen table, and I had let both calls go to voicemail, rather than take them anywhere but face-to-face. Ray was waiting for me at his desk when I walked in, and he had another man with him I did not recognize. Younger, maybe 30. Wearing a company polo, and the particular tired look of somebody who had been called in on short notice to solve a problem that was not officially his job. "This is Marcus," Ray said. "IT. He does not usually work with drivers direct, but I told him it mattered, so here he is." Marcus gave me a nod and turned his laptop screen so I could see it. A login page for the cloud storage provider the company used for dash camera footage. Ray explained the situation, he said. "I want to set expectations before we start, because I do not want to get your hopes up past what I can actually deliver. When a file gets deleted from the driver-facing app, it does not disappear from the underlying storage right away. Most systems like this keep a recycle window 30 to 90 days typically, before a deleted file is actually purged for good. You said this was deleted around what, last June?" "Sometime in June. I do not remember the exact date. That is 5 months ago. If the recycle window on this system is 90 days, which is common, that file is gone. Truly gone. I want to be straight with you about that possibility before we spend an hour digging." I felt my stomach drop the same way it had in the driveway 4 days before. But I made myself nod and say go ahead anyway. Because sitting there, hoping without looking, was worse than looking and finding nothing. Marcus worked for the better part of 20 minutes typing, waiting, typing again, occasionally muttering something to himself that I did not follow. Ray sat across the desk from me, not saying much, just present, the way a good friend is present in a hospital waiting room, even when there is nothing useful for him to actually do. "Okay," Marcus said, finally sitting back. "Good news, bad news. You want good first? Everybody keeps asking me that this week, I said. Give me the good. The good news is this particular fleet account has a 180-day recycle window, not 90. Because of an insurance rider the company added 2 years back, requiring extended retention on all incident-adjacent footage. 5 months out, you are still inside that window. And the bad news? The bad news is deleted footage in the extended recycle bin is not accessible through the standard driver interface, or even through my normal admin tools. It requires a formal data recovery request through the vendor directly, with account verification, and typically a written justification for why you are requesting restoration of deleted content. It can take anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks, depending on how backed up their support queue is. 3 days to 2 weeks. I thought about Marguerite's warning that the sale was closing soon. I thought about my mother's cardiology appointment the next morning. I thought about how many clocks I suddenly had running at once, all of them ticking down at different speeds toward different kinds of loss. Is there any way to push it faster? I asked. Ray leaned forward. There might be. If this turns into something with legal involved, actual attorneys, a formal preservation request carries more weight with a vendor than an employee just asking nicely. Vendors move faster when there is a lawyer's letterhead attached, because they do not want to be the ones sitting on evidence in litigation. I do not have a lawyer yet. Then I would say that is the next call you make, Ray said. Because between what I have got in certified ELD data and whatever is sitting in that notebook you are hugging like it is made of gold, and now a dashcam clip that might or might not survive the recovery process, you have got the bones of something real here, Wendell. But bones on a kitchen table do not mean anything to a judge. You need somebody who knows how to put them together the right way. I sat there a long moment, looking at the two of them. A dispatcher who had known me 11 years and an IT man I had met 20 minutes before. Both of them leaning in on my behalf like this was somehow their fight too. And I felt something I had not felt much of in the last 4 days, which was that I was not entirely alone in this. Submit the recovery request, I said to Marcus. Whatever paperwork it takes, I will sign it today. I will get the form started, Marcus said, already typing. You should also know, for what it is worth, request timing matters. The sooner it is in the queue, the sooner it comes out the other end. I thanked them both, and I walked back out to my truck in the cold, with a notebook under one arm and a request for data recovery already moving somewhere through a system I did not understand. And I sat behind the wheel a long moment before I started the engine, because I had one more call to make, and I did not yet know a single lawyer's name to make it to. Then I remembered something Corinne had said herself 4 days earlier, sitting at that kitchen table with a cup of tea, trying to explain away a deed she had helped forge. Dale Prescott's wife is Marguerite, and Marguerite's closest friend from the County Bar Association, I recalled from some cookout conversation years back, half listened to at the time, and somehow retained anyway, was a woman who practiced real estate and probate law out of a small office on South Street in Wilmington. I dialed information and asked for her number. The lawyer's name was Susan Farrow, and when I finally reached her office that afternoon, her assistant told me she could see me the following morning at 9, which happened to be an hour before my mother's cardiology appointment. Close enough together that I would have to move fast between the two, but I took the slot without hesitating. I drove home after that call, and for the first time in 4 days I walked back through my own front door, instead of circling the place like a man unsure whether he still belonged there. Corinne's car was gone again. I did not ask where. I went straight down the hall to my mother's room, and I found her sitting up against her pillows, with the reading lamp on the sewing tin already out on the quilt beside her, like she had been waiting. "You look like a man who has had a long day," she said. "I have had a long several days, Mama." I sat on the edge of the bed and set the plastic bag with Emmett's notebook down carefully beside the tin. "I went and saw Emmett this morning. I apologized. He forgave me a great deal faster than I deserved. Something eased in her face, a tension I had not fully noticed until I watched it let go. That is the best news I have had all week. He gave me something too. I told her about the notebook, about 2 years of entries about the second car in our driveway. On September 17th, while I was in Texas and Corinne was, by Emmett's account, also gone. I watched her listen to all of it, with her hands folded on the quilt, very still, the way she gets when something is landing hard and she is working to keep her breathing even. "So it was never even you two in that room signing anything," she said quietly when I finished. "It was done behind both your backs, on a day neither one of you was home to stop it." "That is what it looks like." She nodded slowly. And then she reached over and pulled the tin box toward her, the same tin box I remembered from childhood, dented at one corner, where I had dropped it off a shelf when I was maybe 9 years old. And she worked the lid off with fingers that shook slightly, but did not fumble. Inside, beneath a folded square of felt and a pincushion shaped like a strawberry that I also remembered from childhood, was a manila envelope, soft and worn at the corners, the way paper gets when it has been handled with care over a great many years. "Your father did not trust banks with the things that mattered most," she said, working the envelope open carefully. "He kept the deed to this land in a safe deposit box for a while after we bought it. And then, one year the bank changed hands twice in 18 months, and he came home and said he did not like how many strangers had keys to boxes that were supposed to be his alone. So he made a copy, a proper, certified copy, and he brought it home. And he told me if anything ever happened to the original, this was the second line of defense." She slid the papers out onto the quilt. I recognized the format immediately, having spent the last 4 days looking at nothing else. A warranty deed, county recorder's stamp in the corner, dated 1968. Transferring the parcel at 4419 Sabina Road to my father, and upon his death, by the terms clearly written into the deed itself, to me. "This has been sitting in this tin the whole time," I said. "Your whole life," she said, "and most of mine. I did not think of it until you came to me the other night with what was happening, and even then, I was not entirely certain I still had it, because it has been a long while since I looked. I am glad my memory did not fail me on this, at least." I sat there, holding a 60-year-old document that had been resting in a sewing tin 3 feet from where I had slept the 1,000 nights of my childhood. And I understood, looking at it, exactly what it meant, sitting alongside everything else I now had. Ray's certified data would show I was not in Ohio on September 17th. Emmett's notebook would show a strange car in my driveway at the exact hour the forged deed claimed I had signed it, while both my wife and I were provably elsewhere. And now this, the original chain of title itself. Proof beyond any argument about Medicaid planning or estate strategy, that the house had always, legally and cleanly, been mine, before anyone ever put a pen to that forged September document. "Mama," I said, "I do not think I could have done this without you." She reached over and took my hand, the same steady grip she has had my whole life, stronger in that moment than her failing heart had any right to allow. "Your father built this house to keep his family standing on solid ground," she said. "I have spent 82 years learning that solid ground is not always the dirt under your feet. Sometimes it is a piece of paper in a tin box. Sometimes it is a neighbor with a notebook. Sometimes it is a mother who did not say enough soon enough and is trying to make up for it now while she still can." She squeezed my hand once, firm. "Tomorrow you see the lawyer. Tomorrow after that, we see the cardiologist. One thing at a time, Wendell. That is how your father always did it, and it is how we will do it now." Susan Farrow's office sat above a hardware store on South Street. a narrow staircase leading up to 2 rooms that smelled like old carpet and fresh coffee. And she met me at the door herself rather than sending an assistant. A woman somewhere in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and the unhurried manner of somebody who has seen a great many messes in her career and stopped being rattled by new ones a long time ago. "Marguerite Prescott called ahead," she said, waving me into a chair across from a desk stacked with folders. She did not tell me much. Said a neighbor of hers was dealing with something serious and asked if I had room this week. I did not expect it to involve her own husband. I did not either 3 days ago. Start from the beginning. Do not skip anything, even if it feels embarrassing or off topic. I have heard worse than whatever you are about to tell me, and the parts that feel irrelevant are usually the parts that matter most. I told her everything. The driveway, the survey stake, the deed with my forged signature, the Medicaid explanation Corinne had offered at the kitchen table and how it had almost worked on me, the recorder's office, the notary block with Tricia Vance's name, the title report from Meridian Logistics Partners, and the $640,000 figure attached to it. Ray and the certified ELD data placing me outside Amarillo at the exact hour the deed claimed I had signed it. Emmett and his notebook. 2 years of quiet entries. And the one dated September 17th, showing an unfamiliar sedan parked in my own driveway during the very window the notary block claimed to have witnessed my signature, while both my wife and I were provably elsewhere. My mother's tin box, and the certified copy of the original 1968 deed that had never actually left our family's chain of title at all. And Marguerite herself standing in a cold parking lot, telling me about a text message signed with a heart and a comment Dale had made about somebody named Tricia owing him a favor. Susan Farrow took notes the entire time and did not interrupt once, and when I finished, she set her pen down and sat back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. "Mr. Gaines," she said, "in 22 years of practicing property law in this county, I have seen forged deeds before. I have seen family members try to push property through Medicaid planning schemes that do not hold up to scrutiny. What I have rarely seen is a client walk in with this much corroborating evidence assembled in less than a week. You have done a remarkable job of building a record most attorneys would need a private investigator and a month to put together. I had help. You had good help and good instincts about how to use it." She pulled a legal pad toward her and started writing. "Here is what we are going to do in order. First, I am filing an emergency motion to quiet title and to place a lis pendens on the property immediately, today, if the clerk's office will take it, which puts anyone considering a purchase on formal notice that title is disputed. That alone should freeze Meridian Logistics from closing, because no reputable buyer's counsel will let a deal proceed once a lis pendens is recorded. How fast can that happen? Filed today, recorded today, or tomorrow morning at the latest. It will not wait on the rest of the case to develop." She kept writing. "Second, I want a handwriting expert to examine the actual signature on that deed against exemplars of your genuine signature, which we can pull from your commercial driver's license renewals, your certified ELD driver profile, and any other documents bearing your true signature over the years. A forged signature, even a good one, almost always shows subtle inconsistencies to a trained eye, particularly under magnification. And the notary. Tricia Vance. Notaries are held to a very high standard in Ohio, Mr. Gaines, precisely because their entire job is certifying that the person in front of them is who they claim to be. If she notarized a document without you physically present, and your evidence strongly suggests that is exactly what happened, she is exposed to both civil liability and potential criminal charges for fraudulent notarization. That is significant leverage. In my experience, notaries caught in something like this are often the first domino to fall, because they have the most to lose personally, and the least loyalty to protect anyone else involved. I sat there, absorbing all of it. And for the first time in 5 days, I felt something that was not quite relief, but was close enough to be its neighbor. What about the client escrow angle? I asked. Dale works at a bank. If he was involved in facilitating this, if a licensed loan officer or bank employee knowingly facilitated a fraudulent property transfer that opens a separate regulatory can of worms entirely, potentially involving the state banking division and possibly federal authorities, depending on how any financing for the Meridian purchase was structured. I do not want to promise you outcomes there yet, because that piece is still speculative, but it is worth pursuing. And I know exactly who to call at the state level to ask the right questions. She looked up from her legal pad, and for the first time since I had walked into that office, her expression softened slightly. The professional distance easing just a little. Mr. Gaines, I want you to understand something before you leave here today. What was done to you and your mother was not a misunderstanding or an aggressive interpretation of estate planning. Based on everything you have shown me, this was a coordinated fraud, and the people who built it made one critical mistake they could not have anticipated. They assumed a man who drives a truck 300 days a year would not have the patience or the resources or the support system to fight back properly. They were wrong about that. They were very wrong about that, she said, and for the first time she almost smiled. Now, let us go make sure they understand exactly how wrong. I made it to the cardiology office with 4 minutes to spare, my mother already sitting in a wheelchair in the waiting room, because the nurse said walking too far had left her short of breath that morning, and the sight of her sitting there, small and pale under the fluorescent lights, put everything Susan Farrow and I had just discussed somewhere far away in my mind for a while. The cardiologist was a younger man named Dr. Okafor. Thorough and direct, in a way I appreciated. And he sat with both of us in a small consultation room after the tests and laid it out plainly. Mrs. Gaines, your heart is not failing suddenly, he said. It has been declining gradually for some time, and what we are seeing now is the aortic valve narrowing to a point where your body is struggling to keep up with normal activity. This is treatable. I want to be clear about that first, because I know how frightening these conversations can be. Treatable how? I asked. There is a procedure called TAVR, transcatheter aortic valve replacement. It is far less invasive than traditional open-heart surgery, which, at 82, with her other health factors, I would be reluctant to recommend. TAVR goes in through a catheter, typically through the femoral artery, and replaces the valve without cracking the chest open. Recovery is measured in days rather than months in most cases. My mother's hand found mine on the arm of her wheelchair. What happens if we wait? She asked. Dr. Okafor's expression stayed steady, but I could see the honesty in it. The valve will continue to narrow. Eventually, the heart cannot compensate any longer. And at that point, we are looking at heart failure that becomes very difficult to manage. I would like to schedule this procedure within the next month, ideally sooner rather than later. We talked through logistics for a while after that insurance authorization, pre-procedure testing, the kind of practical machinery that surrounds even the most serious medical news. And by the time we left that office, I had a folder of paperwork under one arm and a scheduled date 3 weeks out. And my mother had a look on her face that I recognized from childhood. The look she used to get right before she decided to do something difficult without complaining about it. We sat in the truck in the parking lot for a few minutes before I started the engine. Both of us quiet. 3 weeks, she said finally. 3 weeks. Wendell, I need you to hear something from me, and I need you to actually hear it, not just let it pass by the way men in this family tend to do with things that are hard to sit with. She turned in her seat as much as her seatbelt allowed and looked at me directly. Whatever happens with that house, whatever the lawyer manages or does not manage to accomplish, I am not going to let it distract either one of us from what actually matters in the next 3 weeks. Do you understand me? I understand you. I mean it. I have watched you carry the weight of that land like it was a debt owed to your father's memory. And I love you for how seriously you take that. I do. But your father built that house so his family could stand on solid ground. Not so his son could destroy himself trying to defend 4 walls at the expense of everything else. If it comes down to a choice between fighting for that house and sitting with me through this procedure, you choose me. Every single time. Do you hear me? I hear you, Mama. But I do not think it has to be a choice. Susan Farrow is filing paperwork today that should stop the sale cold, regardless of anything else happening. I can fight for the house and be here for you both. I intend to. She studied my face a long moment, the way she has studied me my whole life, looking for the truth underneath whatever I had just said. All right, she said, finally softening. Then let us do both, and let neither one crowd out the other. I started the truck, and as we pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from Susan Farrow. List pendants filed and recorded as of 11:40 this morning. Meridian's counsel already called my office asking questions. Also, I received a call from an attorney representing Trisha Vance. She wants to talk. This may move faster than either of us expected. I read it twice, sitting at a red light with my mother beside me, and 3 weeks until her heart procedure, sitting on the calendar like a second, quieter kind of deadline. And I understood that whatever was coming next, it was coming fast, and it was coming for more than just Corinne and Dale Prescott. Susan Farrow called me that same evening, instead of waiting for our next scheduled meeting. And there was an energy in her voice I had not heard in our office visit 2 days before. Trisha Vance's attorney reached out because she wants to cooperate, Susan said. That is a very good sign for us, Mr. Gaines, and I want to explain why before we go any further, because understanding her position helps you understand how quickly this may unravel for everyone else involved. I am listening. A notary's entire professional existence rests on one thing: their bond and their license. Ohio requires notaries to carry a surety bond precisely so that if they are found to have acted fraudulently, there is a mechanism to make victims whole. Once Trisha's attorney reviewed what we filed alongside the list pendants, specifically your certified ELD data placing you 1,100 miles away at the exact hour she claims to have witnessed your signature, she understood immediately that she has no viable defense to a fraudulent notarization claim. None. That is not an argument I am making to you as your advocate. That is simply where the facts sit. So she is going to testify against Dale. She is going to tell us the truth, which I suspect will implicate Dale Prescott quite thoroughly, and possibly your wife as well, though I want to be careful not to get ahead of what we actually know yet. Her attorney has proposed a proffer session, essentially a conversation where she tells us what happened in exchange for our agreement not to use anything she says directly against her, provided she is fully truthful, and provided the extent of her own conduct was limited to the notarization itself, rather than anything more actively criminal. When? 2 days from now, at my office. I would like you present, though you will not be speaking, only listening. And afterward, we can discuss what it means for the broader case. I sat with that for a long moment after we hung up, turning it over the way you turn over a stone you are not sure you want to see what is underneath. 2 days later, in Susan Farrow's small office above the hardware store, I watched Trisha Vance tell the truth, for what I understood from the exhaustion in her face was probably the first time in a very long while. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, dressed carefully, sitting with her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale. Her attorney sat beside her, a stiff younger man who mostly interjected to remind everyone of the terms of the proffer agreement. And Susan Farrow sat across from them both, with a legal pad and a patience I was beginning to understand was not an act, but simply how she worked. "I have known Dale Prescott for about 6 years," Tricia said, her voice low and steady in the way of someone who has rehearsed a hard thing enough times to get through it without breaking. "He referred clients to my notary practice regularly, mortgage closings, refinances, that sort of thing. And over time, he started asking for favors that were smaller at first. Backdating a signature date by a day or two because a client missed a deadline, notarizing a document with only one spouse present, and telling me the other spouse had already signed and initialed elsewhere, which happens more often than you would think in legitimate transactions. So I did not always question it as closely as I should have." "And the Gaines deed," Susan said gently. Tricia's composure cracked slightly there, just at the edges. "Dale called me in early September and said he had a friend, a woman, whose husband was on the road constantly, and that the husband had verbally agreed to transfer the property, but travel made it impossible to get him in for an in-person signing before a closing deadline. Dale said he would bring the wife in, along with the paperwork, already bearing what he told me was the husband's authentic signature from an earlier document, and asked if I could notarize based on the wife's presence, and his assurance that everything was in order. Did you ask to see any identification for the husband, for Wendell Gaines?" "No." The word came out very small. "I should have. I know that now. I did not require his physical presence at all. Dale brought Corinne to my office on September 17th, along with the deed already signed, and I notarized it, based on his representation that the signature was authentic and that proper authorization existed. I never met Wendell Gaines in my life until this moment." I sat very still in my chair, listening to a stranger casually confirm in a lawyer's office above a hardware store that the entire foundation of the document that had nearly cost my family everything had been built on nothing more than one man's word to a notary he had a long, comfortable favor-trading relationship with. "Where did the notarization actually take place?" Susan asked. "Your office or somewhere else?" "Dale asked me to come to the house. He said it would be more convenient, less conspicuous since the husband traveled so much, and he did not want neighbors asking questions about why Corinne was suddenly at a notary's office alone. I met them at the Gaines residence around 1:30 in the afternoon on September 17th. Corinne let me in. Dale was already there. I notarized the document at the kitchen table, and I left a little after 2. There it was, confirmed from her own mouth, matching Emmett's notebook entry, almost to the minute, matching Ray's certified data, showing me parked outside Amarillo at the very hour she claimed a signature had been witnessed, that never happened in her presence at all. "One more question," Susan said, her voice still gentle, but with an edge underneath it now. "Was there any discussion at that meeting, or before it, about the sale to Meridian Logistics Partners?" Tricia hesitated, glanced at her attorney, who gave a small, reluctant nod. "Dale said the deal was already lined up," she said quietly. "He said Meridian had been looking at that stretch of road for over a year for a distribution facility, and once the property was in Corinne's name alone, the sale could move forward without complications. He said it like it was already decided, like the only thing standing in the way was a piece of paper with the right name on it." I sat back in my chair and let that settle over me, the whole shape of it finally visible, end to end. Not a hasty affair that had spiraled into a bad decision. A plan built over months, with a buyer already waiting, executed on a day carefully chosen because it was a day I would be far enough away to never see it happen. Using a notary Dale had cultivated for exactly this kind of favor, for years, before my name ever entered the picture. The days after Tricia Vance's proffer session moved faster than anything else in this whole ordeal. The way water moves faster once it finds the crack in a dam that has been holding back too much for too long. Susan Farrow called me on a Wednesday morning, and this time there was no careful pacing in her voice at all. "I need you to come to my office," she said. Something has happened that changes the shape of everything, and I would rather explain it to you in person. I drove in immediately, my mother's procedure now 9 days out on the calendar, and found Susan waiting with a folder considerably thicker than the one she had been keeping when I first walked through her door. Once we filed the list pendants, and Tricia Vance's proffer became part of the record, she said, word travels in professional circles faster than most people realize. The Ohio Division of Financial Institutions received an anonymous complaint 2 days ago regarding lending irregularities at the bank branch Dale Prescott manages. I do not know for certain who filed it, though I have a suspicion, and I am choosing not to ask too many questions about that suspicion out of professional caution. Marguerite, I did not say that. But something in her expression told me I was not wrong. What matters is that the state examiners opened a preliminary inquiry, and what they found in the first pass was significant enough to refer the matter to federal banking regulators. Dale Prescott had been using his position to expedite financing approvals for Meridian Logistics Partners on multiple prior acquisitions in the region, apparently in exchange for what appears to be a series of undisclosed personal payments, routed through a consulting arrangement that does not seem to reflect any actual consulting work performed. I sat with that a moment. He was getting paid by the same company buying my father's land. It appears that way. And your property was not the first parcel acquired through what the examiners are now describing as a pattern properties where the seller's paperwork had irregularities that were never adequately scrutinized because Dale's relationship with the buyer and with certain notaries in his circle kept the underwriting process moving faster than it should have. Your case may be the one that finally exposes something that has been happening for longer than any of us initially realized. What does that mean for Corinne? Susan's expression grew careful, in the particular way it did when she was about to tell me something she knew would be difficult to hear, regardless of how she phrased it. Based on the bank examiner's preliminary findings, and Tricia Vance's statement, your wife was present for the notarization, and had direct knowledge that you were not in fact present or aware of the transaction. That moves her conduct well beyond someone who was simply misled by a man she trusted. She actively participated in facilitating a fraudulent transfer of real property using a forged signature, with the intent to sell that property to a third party for personal financial benefit. Susan paused. I want to be honest with you, Mr. Gaines. Depending on how the county prosecutor chooses to proceed once all of this evidence is formally presented, your wife is facing potential criminal exposure, forgery, and depending on how the funds from a completed sale might have been structured, possibly conspiracy charges alongside Dale Prescott. I sat in that small office above the hardware store and felt something I had not expected to feel at that particular moment, which was not satisfaction and was not quite grief either, but some tired, heavy cousin of both. What happens now? I asked. Now the civil side is essentially resolved in your favor. With Tricia's proffer, Emmett's contemporaneous notebook entries, Ray's certified ELD data, and your father's original 1968 deed, all pointing the same direction. No court is going to uphold that September transfer. I expect a judge to formally quiet title back in your name within the next several weeks. Likely faster, given how thoroughly documented this is. Meridian Logistics has already withdrawn their offer entirely, by the way. Their counsel called mine yesterday. They want nothing to do with a property this contaminated by fraud allegations. And the criminal side. That is out of my hands, and largely out of yours as well, once the evidence is formally referred. The county prosecutor's office will make their own determination about charges, timing, and how to proceed against Dale Corrine and potentially Tricia Vance, depending on how her cooperation agreement is ultimately structured. She closed the folder gently. I know none of this feels like a clean victory, Mr. Gaines. Very few of these cases do. You are not just winning a property dispute. You are watching the collapse of a marriage, played out through a legal system that does not particularly care about anyone's feelings along the way. I thanked her and left that office and sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long while before I started the engine, thinking about a woman I had married 22 years earlier at a lemonade stand of a courtship that had started with a dunk tank and a summer fair, and how far apart that memory now felt from a folder full of forged signatures and bank examiner referrals sitting on a desk above a hardware store. My phone buzzed. A text from Delia. The first word from her in over a week. Mom told me everything today. All of it. I am so sorry, Dad. I need to see you. I read it twice, and for the first time in 9 days, I let myself cry, sitting alone in that truck in a parking lot on South Street. Not because I had won anything, but because somewhere in the middle of all this ruin, a small piece of what I had lost was finally coming back. The weeks that followed did not move like a movie. I want to say that plainly, because if you have been listening to this story, waiting for one enormous dramatic scene where everything gets settled at once, that is not how it went. And I think the truth of it matters more than a tidy ending would. The judge quieted title back into my name 5 weeks after that meeting in Susan Farrow's office. A quiet administrative ruling, with no courtroom drama attached to it at all. Just a document and a signature and a stamp, which felt strange after everything it took to get there. Meridian Logistics never came back. The County Planning Commission never held a rezoning hearing because there was never again a buyer willing to touch a parcel with that much history attached to it. Corinne moved out during the 3rd week into her sister's place over in Xenia, and we have not spoken more than a handful of necessary sentences since, mostly through attorneys, mostly about the divorce, which is still working its way through the courts as I tell you this. I do not know yet what will happen with the criminal charges. The prosecutor's office is still deciding, and Susan tells me these things take time, and I have made a kind of peace with not knowing. Because there's nothing left for me to control about that part of it. Dale Prescott lost his position at the bank 2 weeks after the state examiner's findings were formally referred. Marguerite filed for divorce the same week, and though I have not spoken to her much since that day in the parking lot, I understand from Susan that she has been fully cooperative with every investigator who has come calling. And I hope wherever she lands, that she finds something steadier than what she had. Tricia Vance surrendered her notary commission voluntarily before the state board could revoke it, which Susan says will likely count in her favor if the prosecutor decides to pursue charges against her at all. None of that is the part of this story I actually want to end on, though. I've told you a great deal about deeds and forged signatures and data logs, and all of it was necessary, but none of it was ever really the point. My mother had her procedure on schedule 9 days after that conversation in Susan's office, and it went exactly the way Dr. Okafor said it would. She was home in 3 days, walking the hallway with a cane by the end of the first week, and sitting up in her own garden chair on the back porch by early spring, watching the walnut trees my father planted put out their first leaves of a new season. Delia and I have spent a great many Sunday afternoons together since that text message, working slowly back towards something that will never be exactly what it was before, but is honest in a way it perhaps was not before either. She told me about the paper chain again, the real story of it this time, and I told her about the missed birth in Terre Haute, and we sat with both of those things together, and neither one of us tried to make the other one smaller than it was. I went to see Emmett Boyle on a Sunday in April, not to ask him for anything this time, just to sit on his porch with a cup of coffee and talk about nothing in particular. And I have kept doing that most Sundays since. He came to my mother's porch one afternoon in May, walking the 1/4 mile the way he used to walk his whole route, and the two of them sat together for 3 hours, talking about a county that neither one of them recognizes anymore. And I stood in the kitchen window watching them, and understood watching it something about what my father actually built that farmhouse for. I drive less now. I renegotiated my routes with the company. Shorter hauls closer to home, More nights under my own roof than I have had in 28 years. It costs me some money. I have made my peace with that trade a long time ago now. Sitting in a cab outside Amarillo with a phone in my hand, and a deed I could not yet explain. I think about that porch a great deal. The one in September, 14 months before any of this started. An old man standing there with his hat in both hands, trying to hand me the truth in the gentlest way he knew how. And me too proud and too tired and too certain of my own version of the world to take it from him. I do not know a way to tell this story that makes that moment smaller than it was. I was wrong, and I was cruel to a good man for trying to help me. And the only thing I can offer in my own defense is that I have spent every day since trying to be the kind of neighbor, the kind of father, the kind of son who would have listened the first time. My mother says that is enough. I am inclined to believe her most days, though I imagine that is a thing a man has to keep choosing to believe, rather than something he gets to settle once and be done with. The walnut trees are getting tall now. My father would tell you they take their time, that a tree does not rush toward what it is going to become, and that a man probably should not either. I am trying to take that to heart, one season at a time. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all of it, as if a year like that boils down to a single lesson you can hand somebody at a dinner table. I do not think it works that way. But if you pressed me, I would tell you this much. Trust is not the same thing as attention. I trusted my wife for 22 years, and I want to be honest that some of that trust was real, and some of it was simply the absence of looking closely, because looking closely takes a kind of courage that a tired man on his way out the door does not always have left in him. There is a difference between believing in someone and simply not asking the hard question because you would rather not hear the answer. I confused the two for a long time, and it cost me nearly everything I had. I learned something else too, standing on a porch 14 months before any of this started, though it took me most of a year to understand what I had actually learned. The people who love you enough to tell you something you do not want to hear are not always the ones who show up loudest. Sometimes they are standing quietly, with their hat in both hands. And the only thing that separates a good man trying to help you from an old fool minding his own business is whether you have the humility to consider even for a moment that he might be right. I was not humble that September evening. I am trying to be now every day that I get the chance. My mother is out on the porch as I finish telling you this, in her garden chair, a blanket over her knees, though the weather has turned warm enough that she probably does not need it. Emmett is beside her, the two of them arguing pleasantly about whether the walnut trees are actually growing faster this year, or whether it just seems that way to two people who have gotten used to counting small mercies. Delia is coming up this weekend, with her own family news to share, and I intend to listen to every word of it, the way a father should, the way I did not always manage to before. I still think about that man, 3 states away, sitting at a truck stop outside Amarillo, with no idea what was waiting for him back home. I do not know how to tell you exactly who I am now compared to who I was then, except to say that the version of me sitting in that cab believed being right about your family meant never asking hard questions of it. I know better now. Being right about the people you love sometimes means asking the question you are most afraid of, and being willing to hear an answer that changes everything. If any part of this reminded you of your own porch, your own quiet warning you did not want to hear, I hope you will think twice before you turn away from it. And if you have ever been the one standing there, with your hat in your hands, trying to hand somebody a hard truth they were not ready for, I hope you know that the good ones eventually come back around, even if it takes them longer than it should. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it meant something to you, I would be grateful if you would share your own thoughts in the comments below. And if you have not already, consider staying with this channel for the next story we have to tell. There are a great many more porches out there, and a great many more people still learning one season at a time how to listen.